You're listening to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where dice hit the floor, paint gets spilled, and no game ever goes exactly as planned. I'm Grizzly, and here we dive headfirst into Warhammer, tabletop gaming, and the beautiful mess that is the hobby life. From epic crits to absolute disasters, we'll cover it all. So grab your minis, roll with me, and let's get reckless. Welcome back to Rolling Recklessly, the podcast where we dive into all things Warhammer Age of Sigmar, from the tabletops and the tournaments to the paint pots and the storylines that shape the mortal realms. I'm your host Grizzly, and today we're looking at where the game stands right now, the evolving state of the meta in this new season of AOS 4th Edition. There's a lot happening in the hobby lately. The Warhammer World Championships just wrapped up in Atlanta, where players from around the world clash for glory, and we'll break down the results and what those top lists tell us about the current meta scene today. On the local front, our weekly match play nights at J&J Gaming Factory are heating up. Prize support has started rolling in, and we've got some incredible games across Sylvaneth, Slaves to Darkness, Stormcast, and Flesh Eater Courts, all leading towards building a strong, connected community for our first full-scale league. We'll also touch on hobby updates, from new builds like my Kharadron Overlords Spearhead with the frigate, to the Nurgle previews we've all been waiting for, including some long overdue model refreshes. And finally, we'll close out with a look at control and momentum in the new meta, reflecting on how armies are adapting and what that means for players at every level, from local tables to global tournaments. So grab your dice, clear your deployment zones, and get ready, because we're breaking down the champions, the challengers, and everything shaping the state of the meta. Let's roll. The 2025 Warhammer World Championships just wrapped up in Atlanta, Georgia, and what a weekend it was. The best players from across the globe came together, representing their nations and showcasing some of the sharpest tactical minds in the game. At the top of the standing stood France's Jean-Baptiste Aymes, claiming victory with his Hedonites of Slaanesh. His mastery of precision, tempo, and board control was incredible to watch, turning what many still consider a finesse faction into a powerhouse on the biggest stage. And second was Martin Feingold, also from France, proving that France's AOS scene is absolutely thriving right now. Their preparations, technical play, and matchup knowledge are on another level. Beyond the champions, we saw a diverse mix of top-tier performers from across the world, including the United States, Australia, and the UK, all bringing strong showings with armies like Fireslayers, Soulblight Gravelords, and Seraphon. What stood out the most, though, was how balanced the top cut felt. No single army dominated the event. Instead, we saw a spread of control, aggro, and a toolbox-style lists, each piloted with incredible skill. It's a great sign that 4th edition meta has settled into a healthy, dynamic space. One of my personal highlights from the event was how Warhammer streamed the finals live on YouTube with none other than AOS Coach behind the commentary desk. He did an excellent job breaking down the tactical decisions, matchups, and players' mindsets throughout the event. It was awesome to see someone from the community, and one of my favorite content creators, bringing that energy and insight to the big stage. And of course, I've got to mention one of my favorite matches to watch, Casper, last year's champion, versus Devin Krieger, a nail-biter between Disciples of Tzeentch and Kruleboyz. It was an incredible back and forth, full of clever plays and tight positioning, with Tzeentch ultimately taking the win. Seeing games like that really drives home just how much depth there is to this current edition. Every movement, every spell, every trade matters. The big takeaway from this year's championships: control is king, whether it's Slaanesh dictating engagements, Tzeentch manipulating the board, or Kruleboyz forcing trades with sneaky shooting. The top players are winning games not by brute strength, but by managing space and tempo. Something every player can learn from, whether you're at a GT or at your local matchup night. While the pros were clashing in Atlanta, the battles here at home were just as fierce, maybe even a little louder. Our weekly matchup play nights at J&J Gaming Factory are officially rolling, and the community's energy has been unreal. We've been starting to get prize support from the store, and the turnout's been growing every week as more people are bringing their armies and jumping into games. This past week, we saw some amazing matchups. On Tuesday, I went up against Zach, Slaves to Darkness, with my Sylvaneth, and it turned out one of those games where every decision mattered. It came down to the final moments. I managed to edge out a victory thanks to a twist card that gave me extra points for holding objectives in my opponent's territory. Final score, 16-15 Sylvaneth. tightest game I've had in a while. Meanwhile, Jesse and Eric had their own slugfest. Stormcast Eternals vs. Flesh Eater Courts, and that one went right down to the wire. Feck pulled out the win 20-19, but both armies put on a show. Because we ranked placement by victory points, Eric took first, and Jesse came in second, and both walked away with prize support, and that's the kind of competitive spirit I love to see. Friendly, close games that come down to the wire. Earlier in the week, I also got a few games in on Monday. I took a newly built Kharadron Overlords out for our first real test flight against Jesse Skaven, and man, what a match. It was all guns, lightning, and warp fire across the board. Kharadron pulled it off 16-14, but the Skaven's recursion and firepower kept it tense all the way through. And the Sunday before that, I got to bring my Seraphon to the table against Eric's Flesh Eater Courts, and that one was a blast. My Cornosaur had a great showing, chomping through 2 of his crypt flares before the tide finally turned in my favor. I don't remember the exact score, but it was a solid win and fun reminder of how dynamic 4th edition has become. What's been great about these nights isn't the games. It's the atmosphere. Everyone's helping the new players, laughing through the dice rolls, and theory crafting their next lists. You can feel the community starting to take shape, and once we get a few more consistent regulars, we'll be kicking off our Spearhead League officially, maybe even moving to a weekend day to get more players involved. The local scene right now is thriving, and the games are competitive, and the energy is exactly what makes this hobby just so special. It's been a busy couple of weeks on the hobby front on my end, both at home and at store. Between new releases dropping and everyone working on fresh builds, the tables at J&J Gaming Factory have been covered in sprues, paint pots, and way too many empty glue bottles. For my part, I've been deep in the grind, assembling another Sand and Bone Spearhead for the store. It's always satisfying putting those kits together, especially knowing new players will get to use them when they're learning the game. On top of that, I've been working through my Kharadron Overlords, expanding what started out as a fun side project into a real force. I finished building the Trekkie Flint box, and now I've got enough units to run the full Kharadron Overlord Spearhead, alongside with the frigate. I also picked up a Baron of Magnet stand for the frigate since my Trekkie Flint kit didn't come with a clear plastic flight stand for some reason. I've been wanting to make sure it's secure and display worthy, especially since the ship has quickly become one of my favorite models in the range. I'm also working on the Gruntstock Trailblazers box and building out a few more of the Von Grin Harpoon crew, slowly rounding out the fleet. Over on the Slaves of Darkness side of things, Zach's been putting in work. He just finished assembling his Nexus Chaotica, the faction terrain for the Slaves of Darkness, and it looks incredible. He's done an awesome job matching it to his colors, his army's colors, bright purples, deep blacks, and those rich gold trims that really make it pop. Seeing it all come together on the table next to his Vanguard and Chaos Knights makes his force look like something straight out of a heavy metal band cover. That, and he's finishing up his Bellicor, and it's looking great. Jesse, on the other hand, has been multitasking like a madman. He's got his Storm Coven painted up beautifully, really dialing it in, that clean, mystical look. And then dove headfirst into the grim dark side of things with the Warhammer 40k box he picked up. He got the new Terminator box for the Ultramarines, and in classic Jesse fashion, had the entire thing assembled almost immediately. Between the Terminators and the Dreadnoughts, he's built a force that's equal parts nostalgia and raw firepower. It's honestly been inspiring seeing everyone's projects come together. Each of us building up not just our own armies, but the local scene itself. That's the magic of hobby progress. Every sprue clipped, every color tested, and every model based adds another piece to the shared experience that really keeps this community thriving. If you've been following the Warhammer community lately, you've probably seen what most hyped about right now. The wave of new Maggotkin of Nurgle releases coming our way. It feels like Papa Nurgle finally decided to spread some love, or, well, contagion, across the mortal realms again. And I'll say it now, I called this one. Back when we covered the Warhammer Quest Darkwater, I mentioned that Nurgle was due for the new Battletome and fresh models. The game's setting in Gyran and hints at pestilence spreading throughout the realms of life just lined up too perfectly. And sure enough, here we are. New models, new lore direction, and what looks like a major refresh to the army. At the center of all of this is the star of the show, Festus the Leechlord. He's been completely reimagined. The new sculpt looks incredible. The details on his vials, his twisted tools, and that smug Plague Doctor vibe make him one of the most characterful Nurgle models to date. You can almost smell the filth and alchemy coming off the base. But Festus isn't the only highlight. The whole new wave looks phenomenal. We've got the new Blight King sculpts, bigger, more detailed, and full of personality, keeping that same grotesque charm that made them one of Nurgle's most iconic units. We have the Infernal Rotbringers, who look like Nurgle's elite warriors with bloated armor and menacing rusted weapons. We got some fresh demon reinforcements, including what looks like to be a few updated sculpts, potentially a new Spearhead box on the horizon, and of course the Battletome, Maggotkin of Nurgle 2025, bringing all of these together and likely expanding on Nurgle's growing influence after the events of Darkwater. The previews also tease some awesome new lore direction. The tagline, "A Noxious Mountain of Gifts," hints that Nurgle's spreading more than just decay. He's evolving, and there's a strong theme of adaptation here, of nature's resilience twisted into pestilence, and I'm all for it. For me, it's exciting, not just because I already run Maggotkin and love the playstyle, but because this release feels like a rebirth. My hope is that they're finally bringing Nurgle's mechanics into full edition, 4th edition shape, tightening up recursion, revisiting control elements, and leaning into what makes the army unique, grinding, enduring, and corrupting everything they touch. And with these new models dropping right after the Darkwater reveal, it really feels like Games Workshop is syncing their storylines and product releases better than ever. If we do get a Nurgle Spearhead out of this, it's an instant buy for me. I already own all the models teased, but seeing them refreshed in the new style would be awesome. All in all, this is one of the most exciting Nurgle updates we've seen in years. Whether you're a longtime Maggotkin fan, or just for a faction with dripping personality, literally, there's never been a better time to let the rot take root. So after covering all the events, previews, and hobby news, it's time to talk about what actually winning games right now. The meta started to settle since the World Championships, and all of the big GTs this month, and a few clear frontrunners have emerged along with some surprising dark horses. At the top of the pack, it's almost impossible to ignore the Soulblight Gravelords. They're continuing to dominate almost everywhere, and they shouldn't shock anybody. Between recursion, board control, and just raw efficiency, they're definitely one of the top tier consistency. Whether it's Prince Vordry leading his Cavaliers, or Radikar anchoring the midboard, Soulblight lists have answers to nearly everything, and they've proven that at every level of play. Right behind them is the Fireslayers have come roaring back into relevance. Multiple recent GT wins show they're no longer the one-dimensional army people used to write off. The rise of the Magmadroths spam builds, especially those running 4 or 5 of the big beast, has redefined what Fireslayers can do. They're fast, hit absurdly hard, and can tank far longer than any of their old playstyle ever allowed. And then there's the surprise contenders, the Kruleboyz. After a rough start to 4th edition, they're suddenly finding success again, even clinching first place at LVO with an 8-0 finish. That's a huge statement for a faction that many players had counted out. The new Monster Killers and Gut Ripper synergies are finally clicking and showing that Kruleboyz can thrive when piloted with precision and a solid grasp of positioning. Beyond the podium, we're seeing Iden of Thiepken, Slaves to Darkness, Stormcast Eternals, and even some Cities of Sigmar builds creeping up in the standings. Thiepken have been riding the wave of their new heroes and updated war scrolls, while Slaves to Darkness are proving their flexibility through relentless offense and resilient control. Cities lists, meanwhile, are leaning into hybrid builds that mix classic infantry with devastating artillery, a throwback to old-school hammer and anvil tactics. It's interesting because the current meta feels wide open. There's a real variety at the top of the tables again. That's not just 1 or 2 factions dominating. The latest General's Handbook, with its new battle tactics and the Scourge of Gairan ability that lets objectives become obscuring, has shaken things up for people more than we've expected. Armies that rely on shooting now have to think twice before setting up firing lines, while close combat and teleport-heavy factions like Sylvaneth Oryx are thriving in the tighter, terrain-focused missions. For local players like us, this meta shift has been awesome to watch. It rewards smart play, not just list power. You can bring the thematic armies like your Gloomspite Gits or your Kharadron Overlords and still perform well if you understand your tools and the mission. That's the kind of balance that keeps the game fresh, and if this trend continues, I think we'll see even more armies competing for top spots going into next season, especially once those new Nurgle and Sylvaneth Battletomes drop. The year of rot might just turn into the year of balance. That's going to wrap things up this week in the Mortal Realms for another episode of Rolling Recklessly. Between the Warhammer World Championships and all the Maggotkin of Nurgle previews and everything happening locally at J&J Gaming Factory, it really feels like the energy in the hobby is peaking right now. The game's never been healthier, and the models just keep getting better, and the stories keep growing, both on the table and off of it. Every episode, I'm reminded of just how awesome this community is, from the people who stop by the store to chat about new armies, to the players who share photos of their hobbies, progress, to everyone online who tunes in week after week. Whether you're rolling dice at home, painting up your next hero, or just hanging out for the lore, thank you for being part of this thread. If you want to jump in deeper, come hang out with us on Discord. We've got channels for list building, hobby progress, and some good-natured dice rolling bragging rights. You can also find me at Instagram at rolling_recklessly_podcast and YouTube at Rolling Recklessly, where I post shorts, episode previews, and behind-the-scenes hobby content. Next time, we'll be diving back into the Broken Realm Saga Part 3, The Dawning of New Powers, continuing the story of how the mortal realms reshaped the gods began to clash. Expect more deep lore dives, hobby insight, and as always, a touch of reckless enthusiasm. But until then, may your crits be high, your paint never dry, and your rolls ever reckless.